I'm Darren from APC. I'm local here in Utah. Just live up the road in a town called Willard that no one's ever heard of. So if you need me, I'm here. I've known Dave for years. I got to put in a plug for Trusted Network Solutions. Dave and I go way back, and I can't say enough good things about him. TNS really gets APC. Dave takes the time to learn power, cooling, which isn't sexy, but he knows it. He can speak to it probably even better than I can. So, been a great partner. I trust that they'll treat you guys very well with APC. And I'd like to thank Dell for being a part of this presentation as well. Another great partner of APC's. So, anything we can do for you guys, don't hesitate to ask. What I'm going to cover today is retrofitting, build or go colo/cloud, choosing the best direction. I'm like Adam. I'm kind of the guy who likes to go out and solve problems, actually look at your infrastructure, see what we can do. I'm not too much of a concept guy, so this is more of a concept presentation, but just know that we can come on site, help you get down to brass tacks and make things happen. So who knows APC for SmartUps and backups? A lot of people in this room, small desktop stuff. A lot of people don't realize that APC has now kind of become that one-stop shop for the physical layer. So we're talking racks, power, cooling, Dcim, which is data center infrastructure management software, security, environmental monitoring. We do it all. And we actually make the biggest UPS on the planet, the 1.6 megawatts. So we're definitely big data center players, and we can help you with the small wiring closet all the way up to 500 plus rack data centers. So let's get into it. Again, I keep saying I got to buy one of these clickers and use it, but right now I'm still doing the old method. So the tail of the dog. As your business grows, obviously IT requirements grow along with that. New technology comes out. You're obviously deploying new things like, say, a Dell Vertex solution. So as those requirements come into play, you obviously have to evaluate what's your capacity, where's this equipment going to go, and sometimes you get to that point where it's hey, I need to assess, am I going to upgrade, build a new data center, or outsource? So that's kind of what we're going to discuss today. I want to give you guys some tools to kind of think about, things to think about if you're going to build, if you are going to go colo, if you are just going to upgrade. So I'll give you guys some things to think about, some tools that you can use to make those decisions. So what happens is it comes down to basically a few criteria that you guys need to take into account. Obviously cost, upfront capital, CapEx, OpEx. You're also sensitive to cash flow. And then there's actually strategic factors that come into play. Cost and cash flow obviously more quantitative, where strategic can be qualitative, but can actually have a big impact on these other two decisions. So strategic being things like company culture. Do you typically like to own your own data center and have that control? Do you mind outsourcing that? So the process to evaluate these things isn't always clear, but hopefully we can help give some direction. Challenges for you guys. How do you create a financial model to evaluate these options? You know, there's a lot of different ways to measure this. Again, CapEx might be important to the C-level folks versus OpEx, or maybe they don't want to do a large capital expenditure to, say, build a data center. So operating expenditures might be more advantageous in this situation. You also need to be able to create that common financial metric to compare those options. And then all those strategic factors, those non-quantitative factors, you need to create a way to evaluate those. So here's what we kind of came up with as some ideas. So for financial metrics, you want to normalize those costs to basically a 10-year total cost of ownership per watt. And then use that information to create a cumulative cash outlay break-even point. So I'll show you some graphs here. They're pretty straightforward. Basically where the cash outlay kind of crosses where you're at that point of break-even. And then insight into operating expenses versus capital expenditures. And I got to preface everything with, I'm the dumb power and cooling guy. I'm not a finance guy. I just know enough about this stuff to be dangerous in a PowerPoint presentation. First, let's talk about upgrade options. So 3 kind of strategies for upgrading what you have. So the first one is low-hanging fruit. Consider easy upgrades. So one big thing with data centers nowadays is we're finding there's a lot of stranded cooling capacity. So what I mean by that is you actually have enough cooling to cool your data center, but you have issues like air mixing. You've got high density deployments. You've got a traditional raised floor setup. You're not getting enough CFM to that equipment to make things happen. So there's actually some things you can do to take care of those situations. So the low-hanging fruit are easy fixes, mainly around cooling or things like that. So for cooling capacity, you can look at things like blanking panels, and that's a simple fix. You put blanking panels in the rack, you eliminate the hot air from coming back into the cold aisle and being brought into the intake of your equipment, shortening the life, short-circuiting your cooling. You can look at doing brushed grommets. Anywhere there's a hole in the raised floor, you're losing cooling capacity by having cool air provided outside the cold aisle when it should just be in that cold aisle area. Containment's actually a big one. Any containment's better than none. Hot aisle containment is more efficient than cold aisle containment. I don't want to get into the physics of it, but basically, the higher the return air temperature of your cooling unit, the more efficient it runs its cooling cycle. So if you can contain that hot air and get it right back into the intake of your air conditioning unit, you're going to up your efficiency right off the bat. Cold air containment is good as well, but again, hot aisle containment is more efficient. The next basic strategy is maybe consider going high density. And we looked at that Dell chassis, that high density chassis. It's obvious we're seeing a lot of computing power in a smaller footprint. So high density in data centers, a lot of traditional data centers aren't designed to handle that high density. So if you can consider putting in maybe a high density zone in your existing data center or create a little high density area, we can address that. Next one finally here is consider adding facility capacity. This is talking kind of modular, containerized stuff. Just know that those solutions are available through APC and Trusted Networks solutions. We do containerized data centers. We also do containerized modules for power, for cooling, and then the whole IT. So here's kind of a model that we've put in place. We've picked some assumptions that are typical. A baseline determined to be about $62 per watt for co-location. So this is a 10-year cost of ownership for co-location. Obviously, billing methods for co-location are different. Some colos charge per rack, some charge per kilowatt used or kilowatts reserved. But this is kind of basic assumptions that we see typical. So in this particular instance, we're looking at like $1,000 per month per rack. Power, $800 per month. Bandwidth, $2,000. Remote hands fee of $225 per hour, and assuming each rack takes about 1 hour per month. So this is just kind of a baseline for where we came up with some calculations that I'm going to show you here. So scenario 1, the low-hanging fruit model. What's our break-even point for doing those air mixing fixes that I was talking about? Now keep in mind here, this is showing a 1 megawatt data center, utilized 900 kilowatts of load. I know there's not a lot of 1 megawatt data centers here in Utah. We've got a couple, but not most everyday data centers. But this also plays out on a smaller scale we've found as well. So in this instance, it's showing that if we do just the blanking panels, brush strips, gain that extra 100 kilowatts in cooling that we lost because of derating, because of that air mixing, basically meaning we have stranded cooling capacity. We're seeing here that the break-even point is basically less than a year. So by doing just these simple upgrades to your own data center versus going to a colo, so the 10-year cost of ownership, $17 per watt for just simple upgrades. Colo 10-year total cost of ownership, $62 per watt. We're looking at roughly 60% savings over the 10-year lifespan of this data center. Break-even point in less than a year. Just one scenario. Scenario 2, that higher density setup. This would be assuming we're adding a 40 kilowatt high density zone with roughly 4 kilowatts per rack, 2N UPS. What that means is redundancy. You have 2 UPSs, an A and a B side. If one were to fail, the other one can take over the load completely. 2N in-row cooling. Oh, and again, this does, I have to preface this with saying this does address having a modular data center approach. A PUE of 1.35, you guys might be wondering what's PUE? Anyone in the room understand PUE? Great, a couple hands go up. PUE is power usage effectiveness, and what that really means is for every kilowatt going into the data center, how much of that is being used for computing resources, for actual IT computing, versus being wasted on maybe an oversized UPS, oversized cooling unit. So the closer you get to 1, obviously 1 being perfect and unattainable due to physics, that would be every kilowatt of power coming into the data center is used for computing and nothing else. So 1.35 is a very healthy PUE. It's actually very attainable. We have data centers here in Utah that have achieved that. So anyway, the break-even point for doing a high-density zone in this scenario is less than 2 years. We're looking at roughly about 50% cost savings over a 10-year total cost of ownership. Now this, I have to again say, this presentation isn't to bash colos or say you need to build your own all the time, because there are definitely situations where colos are advantageous and come into play. This is just giving you guys some things to think about. Scenario number 3, adding to facility capacity with those modules we were talking about. In here, the break-even point is about 2 years, roughly about a 30% savings over the 10-year lifespan of this data center. We'll go from there. And lastly, building a new facility, scenario number 4. Again, large numbers here, 1 megawatt capacity. And again, this is the assumption that you're building a scalable modular facility versus a traditional approach. With a traditional data center design, you pay for everything up front. You oversize that power, oversize that cooling, and hope you grow into it. It's kind of a wasteful approach. With a modular approach, you actually buy what you need now, buy a scalable UPS chassis, maybe look at in-row cooling where you can add cooling units as you grow. So that would be a modular approach to the data center. In this scenario, the break-even time is about 3.5 years. Total cost of ownership for a 10-year period, $42 per watt versus $62 per watt. Looking at about a 20% savings over 10 years of building your own in this scenario. I've found that this actually plays out on the local level. We had a customer here locally who we went through probably 6 months of analysis of co-locating versus building their own. Third-party analysis, and it came back with about that same number, saying they would break even cost-wise at that 3-year period, and they would, based on the lifespan of that data center, they would be smart to build their own. So is it really about the money? There's obviously more factors, those strategic factors I talked about, that may come in and trump any financial decision you guys have. Let's talk about those. So soft issues to consider. Company culture. You guys might have a company culture of keeping things in-house, basically due to your own service level agreements or the need to control your assets. What's your comfort level with IT equipment in shared spaces? When you do look at those colos, you need to look at, okay, I'm going to be sharing space with another company. Oftentimes our racks are right together, or maybe together in a cage. If you're large enough, you'd have your own space, obviously, but in most situations, you will be next to neighbors. And just take a look at how that neighbor's equipment is affecting yours. Make sure their racks aren't blowing into the intake of your racks. There are security parameters in place if you have sensitive data. And just make sure you ask those questions. The IT accessibility to the data center. How quickly can you get in to work on your equipment? Are there any security issues getting into the data center, getting out? And then what's your comfort on the contract terms? What are the service level agreements? Do they have penalties in place if they don't meet their service level agreements? Definitely ask those questions. So here's some of those common discussion points for contract terms. Length of terms, typically 1 to 3 years. What are the magnitude of rate increases? Are you going to see rate increases every year, every 3 years? Do they just come about when the contracts are renegotiated? What's the ability to renew that contract? Or can you terminate? Again, service level agreements, what are their service level agreements to you? And do they hold themselves accountable to those service level agreements? Number 5, critical facilities expertise. And here's a plug for the co-location folks. Obviously, they do this day in and day out. They have highly trained staff who know how to run data centers. Do you want to take that upon yourself to have that highly trained staff? Do you have your confidence in your staff to run your data center? And regulatory compliance, HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley, things like that may require you to actually keep your data center in-house. If not, and if you have to address those compliance issues, make sure you choose a colo that is well versed in those issues and has those compliance rules in place. Life expectancy. Here's a big one that can trump actually a lot of financial decisions. What do you see the lifespan of this data center being? Is this a temporary solution, something you need 1, 2, 3 years? Then obviously colo makes a lot of sense. Just put your equipment in the colo space. You don't have to have that on-premise equipment for a short period of time where it's not going to pay you back. If your life expectancy is over the 5-year mark, a lot of times it may make sense to build your own because of what we showed you there as far as the return on investment. Deployment time frame. This is another one that can play out in favor of co-location. If you need it next week, often you can stand up a colo deployment 1 to 2 months. A data center, if you were to build from concept to commissioning, we're talking 1 to 2 years. If you use our scalable modular approach that APC likes to do for data centers, we can stand up a data center from concept to commissioning in 6 to 9 months. But a traditional data center is 1 to 2 years. So if you have a tight time frame, colo would definitely make sense in that situation. Here's a matrix example I threw on here. So again, things like this help with the decision-making process. If you can have an easy to understand graph to map this out. Data center needed in less than 6 months. Upgrade, a utilization upgrade, or maybe a pod would make sense. Co-location makes sense. Building new and a facility module sometimes doesn't make sense in that short time frame. As I discussed before, the data center need is temporary, less than 5 years. These two choices are out. Co-location makes a lot of sense. Upgrading makes sense there as well. Regulatory requirements requiring you to keep it in-house, that would maybe take a colo out of the picture in this situation. Any questions so far? I'm kind of racing through this. I can slow down too if you want to. Here's the financial model preferences played out. What this is showing here is really just the total cost of ownership in CapEx versus operating expenses. So CapEx, you can see building, obviously there's a large upfront cost. If you were to do this with a modular scalable approach, this CapEx would be a lower initial fee and then a little more in these subsequent years because you would add the power, cooling, UPS, or that type of equipment gradually as your infrastructure grew. Co-location, the big thing obviously here is a larger OpEx expense that may continue to rise over the years. So depending on the cash flow model preference, if CapEx is a big concern and you don't want to have the initial outlay, co-location makes sense in this scenario if OpEx isn't so much a concern. Eye chart, I apologize, but this is really just showing an evaluation scorecard. Each criteria would be ranked 1 to 10. At the bottom, you would take your total score and use this to evaluate if you were to move to a co-location facility or build your own data center. So I should have said this earlier, but when I'm talking cloud/colo, we're not so much talking cloud and managed services in this presentation. We're talking physical infrastructure as it applies to your in-house data center or housing your physical infrastructure in a co-location facility. So you say, Darren, I don't have time to run all these matrix things. I've got a lot on my mind. I want an easy tool to do it. Well, good, because APC actually has a nice little trade-off tool on our website. You can get with Dave or me later. We can guide you to this website. And actually, I should state even better, we'll actually do this for you. So we'll come out, run the numbers, we'll look at your environment, maybe look at where you're looking to house equipment, and we will do this assessment, provide you a deliverable saying, yes, you know, in your situation it does make sense to go to a co-location facility, or here's what you may want to think about for building your own. So you can put in all kinds of parameters, the cost of power, what type of cooling you have, what type of environment you have. It'll tell you a break-even point. It'll show you cash flow charting here on the side. So a lot of what-if scenarios you can run through our trade-off tool. So say you choose the cloud or a colo facility. There are still some things you need to think about. You need to assess and audit your remaining on-site equipment. There will be obviously on-site equipment left on premise. Audit that equipment. It's a good time to actually take a look at that facility and right-size it. You know, what's coming to end of life, or is your cooling now oversized? Is your UPS now oversized? So let's upgrade and let's right-size at that point in time. Also, another big one is bringing things together with a monitoring tool. Now that your edge network, if you will, has become the network, you need to be able to monitor that and also have visibility into your colo space. Shameless plug for APC's StructureWare Dcim monitoring tool. Again, Dcim is Data Center Infrastructure Management. Our tool takes real-time data from temperature sensors, humidity, cameras, rack PDUs, UPSs, anything smart in your data center environment, whether it's colo or on-premise. We take that information real-time into one pane of glass and allow you to make decisions based on that information. So you could hold your co-location provider accountable for their service level agreements and say, hey, you billed me for this month, last month, I'm pulling information directly off my PDUs that say we might need to look at things differently. Very powerful tool. So in summary, again, 10-year total cost of ownership in a lot of scenarios does play out better for doing it yourself. Ends up being cheaper than co-location. But break-even time and capital preservation may be more important, or speed of deployment might be something that's more important that drives you towards a colo facility. So use our tools, work with APC, Trusted Network Solutions, to do those assessments, and we can help you make the right decision. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and any questions? No? Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Del.